Northern California, winter of 1892. A humble farmer unknowingly shelters a mysterious traveler during the worst blizzard in decades. By morning, royal guards arrive at his doorstep, and the farmer's life changes forever when he discovers his guest's true identity. This is a tale of kindness repaid, of lives intersecting in the most unexpected ways, and of how a single act of compassion can alter the course of destiny. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled through Evergreen Valley like a wounded beast, tearing at anything that dared stand against it. Snow fell not in gentle flakes, but in stinging horizontal sheets that could strip the warmth from a man's bones in minutes. Nathan Miller stood at his cabin window, watching the storm rage with a forester's practiced eye. This was no ordinary winter storm. This was the kind that wrote itself into local legends, the kind that took lives. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault, but Nathan had built it with his own hands. 10 years of solitude in these mountains had taught him how to survive. The walls were thick, the roof solid, and the hearth blazed with a fire that pushed back the deadly cold. He was 43 now, with deep lines etched around his eyes, and a beard that had more grey than brown. His hands were calloused from years of working the land, hands that knew how to coax life from stubborn soil. Nathan turned from the window and added another log to the fire. The flames leapt higher, casting dancing shadows across the cabin's simple interior. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserves and dried herbs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. It wasn't much, but it was his, and, after everything, that counted for something. He had just settled back into his chair with a worn copy of Thoreau when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as the wind. But there it was again, more distinct this time, a knocking at his door. Nathan froze. No one ventured into these parts, especially not during a storm like this. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles downhill, and the town of Maplewood was a half-day's ride beyond that. Whoever was out there was either desperate or lost, probably both. The knocking came again, weaker this time. Nathan set his book aside and crossed to the door, unbolting it against the pressure of the wind. The moment he pulled it open, the storm rushed in, bringing with it a blast of freezing air and snow, and a figure that collapsed forward across his threshold. "Good Lord," Nathan muttered, bending down to grab the stranger before they fell completely. The person was bundled in a snow-covered coat, a scarf wrapped around their face, leaving only their eyes visible. Those eyes, half closed now, looked up at Nathan with a desperate plea before rolling back. Without hesitation, Nathan hauled the unconscious stranger inside and kicked the door shut against the storm. The figure was lighter than he expected, and when he lowered them onto his bed, he saw why. Beneath the layers of clothing was a young man, probably no more than 30, with a face pale from cold and exhaustion. "You picked one hell of a night for a stroll," Nathan said to the unconscious man as he worked to remove the frozen outer layers. The stranger's clothes beneath were unlike anything Nathan had seen before, finely made, with intricate stitching and unusual fastenings. Not the sort of thing a common traveler would wear. As Nathan pulled off the man's gloves, something tumbled from an inner pocket, a small, engraved silver case. It landed on the floor with a soft thud, springing open, to reveal a miniature portrait of a regal-looking older woman wearing what appeared to be a crown, alongside a young boy. Nathan stared at it for a long moment, then carefully closed the case and set it on the table without opening it further. Whatever this man was carrying wasn't his business. The stranger stirred slightly as Nathan wrapped him in blankets and placed him closer to the fire. His breathing was shallow, his skin still frighteningly cold. Nathan had seen this before in men caught too long in winter storms, the body shutting down, retreating inward to preserve what little warmth remained. He'd Need more than blankets. Nathan moved quickly, putting a pot of water on to boil. He gathered dried herbs from his shelves, yarrow, elderberry, ginger, medicines passed down from his grandmother, who had learned them from the local tribes before most were driven away. He worked methodically, steeping the herbs, adding honey, from last summer's harvest. By the time he returned to the stranger's side with the steaming brew, the young man's eyes had opened slightly. They were an unusual color, a deep blue that seemed almost violet in the firelight. "Can you sit up?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice low and steady. "You need to drink this." The stranger made a feeble attempt to rise, then fell back with a groan. Nathan slid an arm behind his shoulders, supporting his weight as he held the cup to the man's lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "It'll warm you from the inside." The man complied, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. After a few swallows, he turned his head away, his strength seemingly spent by even this small effort. "Rest," Nathan said, lowering him back onto the makeshift bed. "The storm won't let up till morning, and you're not going anywhere before then." The stranger's lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Nathan leaned closer. "Thank you," the man whispered, his accent strange and lilting. Then his eyes drifted closed again. Nathan watched him for a moment longer, noting the way the stranger's breathing had already deepened, becoming more regular. He would live, provided fever didn't set in. Nathan had done what he could for now. He moved back to his chair, picking up his book, but not opening it. Instead, he studied the unconscious man across the room. There was something odd about him, something that didn't quite fit. His hands, though currently limp with exhaustion, showed none of the calluses that marked a working man. His face, even pale and drawn with cold, had a certain refinement to its features. And those clothes. Nathan's eyes drifted to the silver case on the table. A nobleman, perhaps. Some wealthy European tourist who'd taken a wrong turn and gotten separated from his guides? It wasn't unheard of. The California mountains drew their share of adventure seekers from across the ocean, though most had more sense than to travel in winter. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rattling the windows and howling down the chimney. Nathan added another log to the fire and settled back in his chair. Whatever the stranger's story, it would have to wait until morning. For now, they were both prisoners of the blizzard, sharing the small pocket of warmth and safety. Within these wooden walls, as the night deepened, Nathan dozed fitfully, waking every hour to check on his unexpected guest. The stranger burned with fever now, muttering in a language Nathan didn't recognize. Twice he had to change the man's sweat-soaked shirt, using one of his own, much too large but clean and dry. He applied cold compresses to the feverish brow, and forced more of the herbal brew between the cracked lips whenever the man was lucid enough to swallow. It was near dawn when the fever finally broke. Nathan, exhausted from his night-long vigil, had just stepped outside to gather more firewood when he heard hoofbeats approaching through the thinning snowfall. He straightened, squinting into the pale morning light. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their horses struggling through the deep snow. They wore dark uniforms with gold trim, their posture military straight despite the difficult terrain. Each had a sword at his hip and a pistol holstered at his side. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache, raised his hand. When he spotted Nathan, "You there, woodsman!" he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still, cold air. "We seek a traveler who may have passed this way." Nathan felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He glanced back at his cabin, thinking of the unconscious stranger inside, of the silver case with its portrait. These men, with their uniforms and weapons, looked like trouble. "Been a blizzard," he called back, keeping his voice neutral. "Nobody's passed through here for days." The lead rider exchanged glances with his companions, then urged his horse closer. "We have reason to believe a man sought shelter in these mountains yesterday. It is extremely urgent that we find him." "I'm the only one up this high," Nathan replied, crossing his arms. "And I haven't seen anyone." The rider studied him for a long moment, his eyes cold and assessing. Then, to Nathan's surprise, he dismounted and approached on foot, one hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword. "My name is Captain James Harrington of the Royal Guard," he said when he was close, enough to speak without shouting. "And I believe you're lying to me, Mr. Miller," Nathan supplied, not backing away, despite the implied threat. "Nathan Miller. And I don't appreciate being called a liar on my own property, Captain." Harrington's mustache twitched. "Then perhaps you wouldn't mind if my men and I searched your cabin? If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to hide. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Nathan's jaw tightened as he stared back at Captain Harrington. The Royal Guard. Not the American military, then. Foreign. His mind raced, calculating his options. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but this was his land, his home. "This is American soil, Captain," Nathan said finally. "You have no authority here." Harrington's face hardened. "This isn't about authority, Mr. Miller. It's about a missing person of great importance." Before Nathan could respond, the cabin door creaked open behind him. He turned to see his mysterious guest standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support. Though still pale, the stranger stood straight, his bearing suddenly regal, despite the oversized borrowed shirt and his disheveled appearance. "Stand down, Captain," the stranger said, his voice stronger than Nathan would have thought possible. "This man has done nothing wrong." The effect on the three uniformed men was immediate. Captain Harrington dropped to one knee in the snow, bowing his head. The other two riders quickly dismounted and did the same. "Your Highness," Harrington said, his tone utterly transformed, "thank God you're alive." Nathan felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He looked from the kneeling soldiers to the young man in his doorway, understanding slowly dawning, the portrait in the silver case, the fine clothes, the unusual accent. He began, but couldn't finish the thought. The stranger, apparently some kind of royalty, offered Nathan a tired smile. "Alexander Blackwood," he said simply, "Crown Prince of Avonia, and very much in your debt, Mr. Miller." Nathan said nothing, too stunned to form words. A prince. He'd been force-feeding herbal remedies to a prince all night, changing his clothes, wiping his brow like a nursemaid. Prince Alexander turned his attention back to the guards. "Rise, Captain. There's no need for formalities here." Harrington stood, brushing snow from his knee. "We've been searching all night, Your Highness. When your horse returned to the lodge without you..." He left the rest unsaid, but his meaning was clear. They had feared the worst. "A foolish decision on my part," Alexander admitted. "I thought I could make it back before the storm worsened." He glanced at Nathan. "Had it not been for Mr. Miller's kindness, you would have found a corpse instead of your prince." The captain's eyes shifted to Nathan, reassessing him. "Then we owe you a debt of gratitude, sir." Nathan shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Alexander said quietly. "They wouldn't have." He swayed slightly, and Nathan instinctively moved to steady him. "You shouldn't be up," he said, forgetting momentarily who he was addressing. "The fever just broke." Alexander allowed himself to be guided back inside, followed closely by Captain Harrington. The other two guards remained outside with the horses, taking up positions that suggested they were now standing watch. Inside the humble cabin, the contrast between the royal visitor and his surroundings became even more stark. Alexander sank onto the edge of the bed, clearly exhausted by even this small exertion. "Your Highness," Harrington began, "we must return you to Oakridge immediately. The king has been informed of your disappearance, and diplomatic channels have been activated." Alexander nodded wearily. "Of course. But I'll need a moment to recover my strength." He looked up at Nathan. and to properly thank my host." Harrington's expression suggested he thought such niceties could wait, but he said nothing. Nathan felt distinctly out of place in his own home. He moved to the stove, more to have something to do with his hands than out of any real purpose. "I can make some coffee," he offered awkwardly. "That would be most welcome," Alexander replied with genuine gratitude. As Nathan busied himself with the coffee pot, he listened to the murmured conversation behind him. Apparently, the prince had been staying at a hunting lodge owned by some California railroad magnate, a diplomatic visit of some sort. He had gone riding alone, against advice, and gotten caught in the sudden storm. "The ambassador is beside himself," Harrington was saying, "and the security implications can be discussed later." Alexander cut him off firmly. "For now, I would like a moment alone with Mr. Miller." Nathan turned, surprised. Harrington looked equally taken aback. "Your Highness, I don't think—" "It wasn't a request, Captain." Harrington's mouth tightened, but he bowed stiffly. "As you wish. I'll be just outside." He shot Nathan a warning glance before stepping out of the cabin. When the door closed, a strange silence fell between the two men. Nathan poured the coffee into two mismatched cups and handed one to the prince. "Thank you," Alexander said, wrapping his slender fingers around the cup. He looked up at Nathan with those unusual violet blue eyes. "Not just for this, for everything. You saved my life last night." Nathan shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Like I said, anyone would have—" "Please don't," Alexander interrupted gently. "We both know that's not true. You took in a stranger during a deadly storm. You tended me through fever without any obligation to do so. These are not small things." Nathan didn't know how to respond. He'd never been good with gratitude. "It's just what people should do," he said finally. Alexander studied him for a moment. "You're not from these mountains originally, are you?" The question caught Nathan off guard. "No," he admitted. "I came west after the war." "Which side?" "Union." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "And you chose this solitude afterward?" Nathan took a sip of his coffee, buying time. Few people asked him such direct questions anymore. Most folks in the area knew better than to pry. "Seemed easier," he said finally, "after everything." Alexander didn't press further, seeming to understand the weight behind those simple words. Instead, he glanced around the cabin with genuine interest. "You built this place yourself," Nathan nodded. "Took 2 summers. Made most of the furniture, too." "It's remarkable," Alexander said, and there was no condescension in his tone, only honest appreciation. "In my country, such craftsmanship would be highly valued." Before Nathan could respond, a knock came at the door. Harrington's voice followed, tight with urgency. "Your Highness, we should depart while the weather holds." Alexander sighed. "He's right, of course." He stood carefully, steadier now than before. "Mr. Miller, I cannot leave without offering you something in return for what you've done." Nathan shook his head. "Not necessary." "Perhaps not to you," Alexander said with a small smile, "but very necessary to me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver case Nathan had seen earlier. "This contains the seal of my house. Present it at our consulate in San Francisco, and you will be received as a friend of the crown." When Nathan hesitated, Alexander gently took his hand and pressed the case into it. "Please, allow me this small gesture." Their eyes met, and Nathan saw something unexpected in the prince's gaze, not just gratitude, but a genuine connection, as if the night's events had forged, something that transcended their vastly different stations. "All right," Nathan conceded, pocketing the case. Alexander smiled. "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "May I ask one more thing of you, Mr. Miller?" "What's that?" "Your name. Your full name, so that I may remember it properly." Nathan blinked, surprised by the simple request. Nathan James Miller. Alexander nodded, committing it to memory. Then I thank you, Nathan James Miller, and I promise you this kindness will not be forgotten. With that, he stepped out into the bright winter morning. Nathan followed, watching as the guards helped the prince onto one of their horses. Captain Harrington mounted his own steed, then turned to Nathan with a formal nod. "The Crown of Ivonia acknowledges your service, Mr. Miller," he said stiffly. "You will be remembered." Nathan simply nodded in return, uncomfortable with the ceremony of it all. Alexander caught his eye one last time, offering a more personal smile before turning his horse toward the path. Nathan stood in the snow, watching until the small party disappeared into the trees. Then he slowly walked back into his cabin, which suddenly seemed emptier than before. He fished the silver case from his pocket, studying it in the morning light. The royal crest was intricate, a falcon above a crown, surrounded by what looked like laurel leaves. He set it on the mantel above his fireplace, already convinced he would never use it. What business would a mountain hermit have at a foreign consulate? The encounter felt like a strange dream, something that had happened to someone else. Nathan stoked the fire and returned to his chair, picking up his abandoned book. Outside, the world was quiet, the storm's fury spent. He tried to focus on the words before him, but his mind kept drifting to violet blue eyes and the strange twist of fate that had brought a prince to his door. By noon, he had almost convinced himself to put the whole bizarre episode behind him. There was wood to chop, repairs to make after the storm. Life would continue as it always had, but as he was pulling on his coat, a sound stopped him. Horses again, approaching fast. Nathan stepped outside, expecting perhaps that the royal party had returned for some forgotten item. Instead, he found himself facing 6 riders in unfamiliar dark uniforms, their faces grim. Not the royal guards from earlier. These men wore no insignia, no identification of any kind. The leader, a hawk-faced man with cold eyes, pulled his horse to a stop. "Nathan Miller," he called. Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Who's asking?" The man's thin lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We understand you had a visitor last night. We'd like to discuss that with you." Nathan's hand moved instinctively to the hunting knife at his belt. "Don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," the man said, his accent becoming more pronounced. He gestured, and his companions spread out, encircling Nathan's cabin. "And I think you and I should have a conversation about Prince Alexander." Nathan's mind raced. These men weren't with the prince. That much was clear from their manner, and something told him their interest wasn't friendly. "I've got nothing to say to you," he stated flatly, taking a step back toward his door. The leader's face hardened. "That would be unwise, Mr. Miller." He reached inside his coat and withdrew a pistol, pointing it casually in Nathan's direction. "Very unwise indeed." Nathan stood motionless, keenly aware of the 6 men surrounding his cabin. The leader's pistol remained trained on him, unwavering. These men weren't lawmen or soldiers, at least not American ones. The way they carried themselves spoke of something darker, more clandestine. "I'll ask you once more," the hawk-faced man said, his accent thicker when he spoke slowly. "Where did Prince Alexander go? What did he tell you?" Nathan's mind worked quickly. Whatever was happening here went far beyond a lost royal. These men had tracked the prince to his cabin with alarming speed, which meant they had likely been following him before the storm hit. "Like I said," Nathan replied evenly, "don't know what you're talking about. Had a traveler pass through, didn't give a name. Left this morning heading north." He tilted his head in the opposite direction from where Alexander had actually gone. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Search the cabin," he ordered without looking away from Nathan. 2 men dismounted and pushed past Nathan into his home. He heard them inside, overturning furniture, pulling open drawers, searching roughly through his meager possessions. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "You're making a mistake," he said calmly. "I'm just a woodsman who lives alone. Whatever trouble you're looking for isn't here." The leader studied him for a long moment. "You Americans," he finally said, "always so convinced of your isolation from the world's affairs. But the world has a way of finding you regardless." Inside, glass shattered, one of the few family heirlooms Nathan had brought west with him. He flinched involuntarily, and the leader noticed a thin smile spreading across his face. "Uncomfortable, Mr. Miller. It could become much more so." The two men emerged from the cabin. One shook his head. "Nothing, sir, but he's lying. There are 2 coffee cups on the table, still warm." The leader's smile faded. "I thought as much." He dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping the pistol trained on Nathan. He was taller than he had appeared on horseback, lean and hard-looking. "I am not a patient man, Mr. Miller. The prince carries something of great importance to my government. I intend to retrieve it." "I told you. He went north," Nathan repeated. "Didn't say anything about being a prince." The man stepped closer. "And I told you that I am not patient." Without warning, he struck Nathan across the face with the pistol. Pain exploded along Nathan's cheekbone. He staggered, but kept his footing, tasting blood where his teeth had cut the inside of his cheek. Years in the war had taught him to absorb. Pain, to push it aside until later. "That's just the beginning," the man said conversationally. "We have methods that make men talk, Mr. Miller, methods that leave very little behind." Nathan spat blood onto the snow. "Seems like a lot of trouble for one traveler." "Not just any traveler." The man circled Nathan slowly. "A prince carrying state secrets, the future of nations in his pocket." Something clicked in Nathan's mind. The silver case. Had there been more in it than just a portrait and royal seal? He kept his face carefully blank. "Last chance," the leader said. "Where did he go? What did he give you?" "Told you already. North. And he didn't give me anything but my thanks." The leader sighed, as if disappointed. "Very well." He gestured to his men. "Bind him. We'll take him with us. Perhaps the sound of his cabin burning will loosen his tongue." 2 men grabbed Nathan's arms, wrenching them behind his back. He considered fighting. He was stronger than he looked. But 6 against 1 were poor odds, especially with firearms involved. Better to wait, to look for an opening. As they began binding his wrists with rope, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. The men froze, and their leader raised a hand for silence. "Expecting company, Mr. Miller?" the leader asked quietly. Nathan said nothing. The hoofbeats grew louder, many horses moving fast. The leader cursed softly in a foreign language. "Get him on a horse," he ordered. "Now!" Before his men could comply, riders burst into the clearing. Captain Harrington and a dozen royal guards, weapons drawn. The captain took in the scene with a single glance, his face hardening when he saw Nathan's bloodied face. "Release him," Harrington commanded. "By order of the Crown of Evonia." The hawk-faced leader didn't drop his pistol. "This doesn't concern your government, Captain. The man is harboring a fugitive." "The only fugitives here are you and your men, Volkov," Harrington replied coldly. "We've been tracking you since Vienna." Volkov's mouth twitched. "Then you know what's at stake." "I know you're outnumbered," Harrington said, gesturing to his men, who had their rifles trained on Volkov's group, "and that assaulting an American citizen on American soil is enough to have you hanged in these parts." For a tense moment, no one moved. Nathan could feel the battle of wills between the 2 men, like electricity in the cold air. Finally, Volkov lowered his pistol slightly. "This isn't over," he said, then barked an order to his men in their native language. They released Nathan, backing toward their horses. "If I see any of you within a mile of this property again," Harrington warned, "my men have orders to shoot on sight." Volkov mounted his horse, eyes never leaving Harrington. You've chosen the wrong side of history, Captain. His gaze shifted to Nathan. And you, woodsman, you have no idea what you've stepped into. With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men close behind. Harrington kept his weapon trained on them until they disappeared from sight. Only then did he dismount and approach Nathan. "Are you all right, Mr. Miller?" Nathan wiped blood from his lip. "I've had worse." He looked at the captain with newfound wariness. "You came back," Prince Alexander insisted, Harrington explained. "He suspected Volkov's men might have tracked him to your cabin." He gestured to one of his men, who dismounted carrying a medical kit. "Let's get that cut looked at." Nathan waved him off. "It's nothing. Who was that man? What did he want?" Harrington hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Anton Volkov, an agent of a rival government. As for what he wants, that's state business." "State business that nearly got me killed," Nathan pointed out. Harrington had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yes. For that I apologize. The prince was right to be concerned for your safety." He straightened his uniform jacket. "That's why I'm here to escort you to safety." Nathan frowned. "Escort me where?" "To the lodge where the prince is staying," Harrington replied. "It's the only place we can guarantee your protection until Volkov is apprehended." "I'm not leaving my home," Nathan said firmly. "Mr. Miller," Harrington said, patience straining, "these men will return. Next time we may not arrive in time. Then I'll be ready for them." Harrington studied him for a moment, then sighed. "The prince thought you might say that, which is why he asked me to give you this." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope sealed with wax. His personal request. Nathan accepted the envelope reluctantly. The seal bore the same emblem as the silver case, a falcon above a crown. He broke it open and unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting was elegant, but firm. "Nathan, if you are reading this, then Captain Harrington has found you in time. For that, I am grateful. I fear I have placed you in grave danger through no fault of your own. The men who seek me will show no mercy to anyone who stands in their way. I ask that you trust Captain Harrington as you would trust me. Come to Oak Ridge Lodge. I give you my word as Crown Prince that you will be treated with all honor, and that when this matter is resolved, you will be compensated generously for any loss or inconvenience. Your debt has become mine, Alexander." Nathan refolded the letter, thinking. He had no desire to get caught up in foreign politics or royal intrigue. His life was here, simple and isolated by choice. And yet he glanced at his cabin, door hanging open, possessions scattered and broken inside. Staying meant risking more than just himself. "How long?" he asked finally. "A few days at most," Harrington replied. "Just until we've secured the diplomatic package and the prince is safely on his way home." Nathan considered his options. He could refuse, fortify the cabin, and wait for Volkov's inevitable return. Or he could go with Harrington, see this strange situation through, and then return to his solitude. "I need 10 minutes, he said at last, "to gather some things." Harrington nodded, relief evident on his face. "Of course. I'll post men around." The perimeter. Inside his damaged cabin, Nathan moved quickly. He packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, a hunting knife, his father's pocket watch. He checked that his shotgun was loaded, then wrapped it in a blanket. Finally, he retrieved the silver case from where he had hidden it, not on the mantel, but in a small hollow beneath a floorboard, where he kept the few valuables he possessed. Whatever was happening, the case seemed to be at the center of it. He slipped it into an inner pocket, then took one last look around his home. He had built this place board by board, a sanctuary from a world that had taken too much from him. Now that world had found him again. Outside, Harrington waited with a spare horse. "Ready, Mr. Miller?" Nathan nodded grimly, securing his bag and wrapped shotgun to the saddle. He mounted in one fluid motion, settling into the familiar feel of a horse beneath him. It had been years since he'd ridden regularly, but some skills never truly faded. As they rode away, Nathan glanced back once at his cabin, standing solitary against the snow-covered mountainside. He had the unsettling feeling that nothing would be the same if he returned. "How far to this lodge?" he asked Harrington, who rode beside him. "About 4 hours," the captain replied. "The prince will be pleased to see you unharmed." Nathan wasn't sure what to make of a prince being concerned for his welfare. In his experience, the powerful rarely spared thought for ordinary men. Yet something about Alexander had seemed genuine. The gratitude in his eyes, the respect in his voice, different from most men of position Nathan had encountered. As they descended through the forest, the guards formed a protective formation. Around them, Nathan rode in silence, alert for any sign of Volkov and his men. The snow had stopped completely now, and the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, turning the white landscape into a sea of blinding light. "The prince said you fought in your civil war," Harrington remarked, breaking the silence. Nathan nodded. "Union cavalry." "I thought as much. You have a soldier's vigilance." Harrington studied him with newfound respect. "The war ended 10 years ago, yet you live as a hermit. May I ask why?" "No," Nathan said simply. Harrington accepted this with a slight nod. "Fair enough." He adjusted his posture in the saddle. "I should inform you that Oak Ridge Lodge is currently hosting several diplomatic guests. The prince is part of a larger delegation." "Meaning I should watch my manners?" Nathan asked dryly. Harrington's mustache twitched in what might have been amusement. "Meaning you should be prepared for curiosity. It's not every day a mountain recluse saves a crown prince." "I didn't know he was a prince," Nathan pointed out. "Just a man caught in a storm." "Which is precisely why the prince holds you in such high regard," Harrington replied. "You helped him as a man, not a title." Nathan had no response to that. They continued riding in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft crunch of snow beneath hooves. Whatever awaited him at Oak Ridge Lodge, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed solitude was about to be shattered completely. Oak Ridge Lodge emerged from the forest like something from another world. Nathan had expected a hunting cabin, perhaps larger than his own, but still rustic. What stood before him instead was a sprawling timber mansion nestled against the mountainside, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Stone chimneys rose from multiple points along the slate roof, trailing smoke into the clear winter sky. "Impressive, isn't it?" Harrington remarked, noting Nathan's expression. "Built by William Thornton, the railroad baron. A monument to excess, some might say." Nathan said nothing. The wealth on display represented everything he had turned his back on after the war. The growing excesses of industrialists, the widening gulf between men who worked the land and those who owned it. As they approached, Nathan spotted guards positioned discreetly around the perimeter, not just the uniformed royal guards like Harrington, but men in plain clothes with the unmistakable bearing of security personnel. They rode into a courtyard where a stable boy immediately rushed forward to take their horses. Nathan dismounted stiffly, his body unaccustomed to long rides after years of walking these mountains. He retrieved his bag and wrapped shotgun, slinging both over his shoulder. "You won't need that here," Harrington said, gesturing to the shotgun. Nathan gave him a level look. "I'll decide what I need." Harrington seemed about to argue, then shrugged. "As you wish, but I'll have to ask you to keep it unloaded while inside." Nathan nodded his agreement. That was reasonable enough. They climbed the broad steps to the lodge's main entrance, where 2 royal guards stood at attention. They saluted Harrington and opened the massive oak doors. Inside, the lodge was even more opulent than its exterior suggested. A great hall stretched before them, dominated by a stone fireplace large enough for a man to stand in. The walls were adorned with mounted game trophies and oil paintings of mountain scenes. Thick rugs covered the polished wood floors, and electric Lights, still a rarity in these remote areas, glowed from fixtures shaped like antlers. "Captain Harrington." A voice called from across the hall. A tall, thin man in formal attire approached, his expression a careful mask of politeness. "We had begun to worry." "Ambassador Wilson," Harrington acknowledged with a slight bow. "As you can see, our mission was successful." The ambassador's gaze shifted to Nathan, taking in his rugged appearance, the healing cut on his cheekbone, and the shotgun over his shoulder. His eyebrows rose slightly. "So this is the woodsman His Highness was so concerned about?" He did not extend his hand. "Nathan Miller," Nathan introduced himself, deliberately omitting any gesture of deference. Ambassador Wilson's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, well, His Highness will be pleased to know you've arrived safely. He's currently in conference with the American Secretary of State, but I shall inform him of your presence as soon as they've concluded." Nathan raised an eyebrow at that. The Secretary of State, here in this remote lodge. Whatever diplomatic matters involved Prince Alexander were significant indeed. "In the meantime," Wilson continued, "we've prepared quarters for you. Harrington will show you the way." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Miller, dinner is served at 7. Evening attire is customary, though, in your case—" He glanced dubiously at Nathan's worn clothes. "We understand limitations." With that, he strode away, his posture rigid with disapproval. "Don't mind Wilson," Harrington said quietly. "He's a protocol machine. Wouldn't know how to treat a man as a man if his life depended on it." "I've met his type before," Nathan replied evenly. "During the war, men who give orders from far behind the lines." Harrington's expression suggested he understood perfectly. He led Nathan through a series of corridors, each as richly appointed as the Great Hall. They passed several well-dressed individuals who eyed Nathan with undisguised curiosity. "The American contingent," Harrington explained in a low voice. "Diplomats mostly, a few business interests." Finally, they stopped before a polished oak door. Harrington withdrew a key and handed it to Nathan. "Your quarters. The prince insisted you be given one of the better rooms." He smiled slightly at Nathan's surprised expression. He was quite emphatic about it. Nathan pushed open the door to find a space larger than his entire cabin. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with leather armchairs was arranged near a private fireplace, already lit and warming the room. Tall windows offered a sweeping view of the snow-covered forest and mountains beyond. "This is—" Nathan couldn't find the right word. "Excessive," Harrington supplied with a hint of amusement. "I believe that was the prince's intention, a small repayment for your hospitality." Nathan set his bag and shotgun on a nearby chair. The room even smelled expensive, like polished wood and fresh linens. It made him uncomfortably aware of his own scent, wood smoke, sweat, and mountain air. "Through that door you'll find a private washroom," Harrington said, noting Nathan's discomfort. "Hot water is available at all hours, one of Thornton's modern conveniences." Nathan nodded his thanks. "I'll leave you to settle in," Harrington continued. "Someone will come to escort you to dinner at 7. He moved to the door, then hesitated. "One more thing, Miller. The silver case the prince gave you." Nathan tensed slightly. "What about it?" "Keep it close," Harrington advised. "It's more valuable than you realize." Before Nathan could question him further, the captain departed, closing the door behind him. Nathan stood in the middle of the opulent room, feeling distinctly out of place. It had been years since he'd slept in a proper bed. Longer still since he'd dined with company. The thought of facing a room full of diplomats and aristocrats made him itch worse than poison oak. He moved to the window, taking in the spectacular view. From this height, he could see for miles across the valley, the endless sweep of pine forest, the distant silver ribbon of a river, the fading gold of the winter sun as it descended toward the western peaks. In other circumstances, he might have appreciated the beauty of it. Now, he only felt trapped. With a sigh, he turned back to explore his temporary quarters. The washroom proved to be another revelation: gleaming porcelain, brass fixtures, and a clawfoot tub large enough to stretch out in. He hadn't had a proper bath in years, making do with cold creek water in summer and heated buckets in winter. The thought of hot water was too tempting to resist. Nathan stripped off his trail-worn clothes and filled the tub, marveling at the luxury of indoor plumbing. As he lowered himself into the steaming water, he felt the tension of the day begin to ease from his muscles. He submerged completely for a moment, then resurfaced with a deep breath. When he emerged from the bath some time later, he found that his dirty clothes had vanished. In their place lay a set of fresh garments, not the formal evening wear the ambassador had mentioned, but good quality attire nonetheless. Clean trousers of sturdy material, a white shirt, and a dark waistcoat. Simple, but far finer than anything Nathan had worn in years. He dressed slowly, uncomfortable with the close fit after years of worn, loose-fitting clothes. As he buttoned the waistcoat, he caught sight of himself in a large mirror and barely recognized the man who stared back. With his beard trimmed during his bath and his hair combed, he looked almost civilized. The cut on his cheekbone stood out starkly against his clean skin, a reminder of the day's earlier violence. Nathan checked the time on his father's pocket watch. Nearly 7. As if on cue, a soft knock sounded at his door. He opened it to find not the servant he expected, but Prince Alexander himself, now dressed in formal evening wear that made him look every inch the royalty he was. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he took in Nathan's transformation. "Mr. Miller," he said warmly, "you look much recovered." "Your Highness," Nathan replied awkwardly, uncertain of the proper protocol. Alexander waved a hand dismissively. "Please, when we are not in formal company, Alexander will do. May I come in?" Nathan stepped aside, allowing the prince to enter. Alexander moved to the center of the room, turning to face Nathan with an expression of genuine concern. "Captain Harrington told me what happened at your cabin. I cannot express how deeply I regret bringing such danger to your doorstep." "Wasn't your fault," Nathan said simply. "Nevertheless, the responsibility is mine." Alexander studied him carefully. "The men who threatened you, they will not stop. Volkov is persistent, and what he seeks." He trailed off, seeming to reconsider his words. "Well, suffice to say, the stakes are considerable." "The silver case," Nathan said. "That's what they want, isn't it?" Alexander's expression sharpened. "You still have it?" Nathan nodded toward his bag. "Hidden." Relief washed over the prince's features. "Good, very good." He moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "I should explain. The case itself is valuable. Yes, a royal artifact. But what truly matters is what it contains." "The royal seal," Nathan supplied. Alexander turned, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "You opened it?" "Just saw what fell out when I found it," Nathan clarified. "A picture and what looked like a seal." "Ah." Alexander nodded slowly. "What you saw was indeed the royal seal of Ivonia, but there is more to it than meets the eye." He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "Hidden within the seal is a key to a diplomatic vault containing documents that could shift the balance of power across Europe." Nathan frowned. "What kind of documents?" "Treaties, military agreements, evidence of certain nations, less honorable activities." Alexander's expression grew somber. "If Volkov obtains them, it could mean war, a war that would inevitably draw in your country as well." Nathan absorbed this in silence. The war he had fought in had killed over 600,000 Americans. The thought of another conflict, this one spanning continents, was sobering. "Why tell me this?" he asked finally. "Because you deserve to know why your life has been endangered," Alexander replied. And because I may need to ask more of you before this is over." Before Nathan could respond, another knock came at the door. This time, a servant appeared, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, Mr. Miller, dinner is served." Alexander straightened, his manner shifting subtly to a more formal bearing. "Thank you," he turned to Nathan. "Shall we? I'm afraid the wolves of diplomacy await us, Mr. Miller. They may prove more daunting than those in your mountains." Nathan retrieved the silver case from his bag and slipped it into his pocket. Whatever game was being played in this lodge, he was now a piece on the board. The least he could do was understand the rules. As they walked the corridor toward the dining room, Alexander spoke quietly. "One word of advice, Mr. Miller. Trust no one here completely, not even those who wear my country's uniform. Volkov has spies everywhere." Nathan nodded grimly. That at least was familiar territory. In war, he had learned that uniforms didn't always reveal true allegiances. Some lessons, it seemed, remained relevant even in peacetime. The dining room of Oak Ridge Lodge was a cathedral to wealth and privilege. A table long enough to seat 30 stretched beneath a chandelier dripping with crystal. Candles flickered in silver holders, casting a warm glow over fine china and gleaming silverware. Liveried servants moved silently around the perimeter, attending to the dozen or so guests already seated. All conversation stopped as Prince Alexander entered with Nathan at his side. The assembled dignitaries rose to their feet, all except one elderly man at the far end of the table who observed the proceedings with amused indifference. "Your Highness," Ambassador Wilson called, gesturing to an empty chair at the right hand of the head of the table, "we were just about to begin without you." "My apologies for the delay," Alexander replied smoothly. "I was welcoming our guest of honor." He turned to Nathan. "Mr. Miller, allow me to introduce Mr. Edward Hayes, United States Secretary of State." The elderly man who had remained seated inclined his head slightly. "Mr. Miller, I understand we owe you a debt of gratitude for saving the young prince here." Nathan nodded uncomfortably, aware of all eyes on him. "Just did what anyone would do, sir," Hayes chuckled. "Modesty, refreshing in these surroundings." He gestured to an empty chair. "Join us, Mr. Miller. I'm told you have quite a story." Alexander led Nathan to the indicated seat, which put him between a middle-aged woman in an elaborate evening gown and a stern-looking man with a military bearing. As Nathan sat, he became acutely aware of his relatively plain attire and the numerous pieces of silverware arrayed before him. "Don't worry about the forks," the woman beside him whispered conspiratorially. "Work from the outside in." She extended a gloved hand. "Elizabeth Thornton, this is my husband's lodge, though he's currently in San Francisco on business." "Nathan Miller," he replied, taking her hand briefly. "You're very kind, ma'am." She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Not at all. These formal dinners are tedious affairs. Having someone new at the table might make things interesting." As servants began to serve the first course, some kind of soup Nathan couldn't identify, Alexander addressed the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to personally express my gratitude to Mr. Miller. During yesterday's blizzard, I became separated from my escort and would certainly have perished had he not taken me in. His selfless actions serve as a reminder of the common decency that binds all humanity, regardless of station or nationality." Murmurs of approval circulated the table. Nathan fixed his gaze on his soup, uncomfortable with the attention. "Tell us, Mr. Miller," called a man further down the table, "were you aware of His Highness's identity when you offered shelter?" Nathan looked up, meeting the man's keen gaze. Something about him seemed off. His accent wasn't quite right, his smile too practiced. "No," Nathan answered simply, "just saw someone who needed help." "How refreshingly American," the man replied with a thin smile. "I am Count Lukov, cultural attaché to the Avonian delegation. We are most grateful for your rustic hospitality." Alexander's expression remained pleasant, but Nathan noticed his fingers tighten slightly around his wine glass. Count Lukov has been an invaluable liaison during our negotiations, he explained to Nathan, though his eyes never left the Count's face. As the meal progressed through multiple courses, Nathan observed the subtle dynamics at play around the table. Secretary Hayes dominated one end, engaged in earnest conversation with Ambassador Wilson and a woman introduced as the French ambassador. At the other end, Count Lukov held court with several younger diplomats, occasionally casting glances toward Nathan and the prince. "The Count seems interested in you," Elizabeth Thornton remarked quietly as servants cleared the fish course. Nathan nodded slightly. "Noticed that." "He arrived only yesterday," she continued, sipping her wine, "caused quite a stir, some sort of last-minute addition to the delegation." Nathan filed this information away. Last-minute additions after the prince's disappearance seem suspicious. "You're very observant, Mrs. Thornton," he noted. She smiled again, this time with a hint of mischief. "When you host as many political gatherings as my husband and I do, Mr. Miller, you learn to read the undercurrents. This particular gathering has more currents than most." Before Nathan could respond, Alexander turned to him. "I was just telling Secretary Hayes about your exemplary service during your Civil War, Mr. Miller. Cavalry, was it not?" Nathan glanced at the prince, surprised he had remembered that detail from their brief conversation. "Yes, Your Highness, 2nd Massachusetts Cavalry." Hayes leaned forward with interest. "Truly? My nephew served with the 2nd Massachusetts. Perhaps you knew him. William Hayes?" Nathan froze, fork halfway to his mouth. The name hit him like a physical blow. "William Hayes." He set the fork down carefully. "I knew him, sir," he said after a moment. "Good man. Fine officer." Hayes nodded sadly. "He fell at Antietam, one of the many losses that still haunt our nation." Nathan didn't correct him. William Hayes hadn't died at Antietam. He'd survived that blood-soaked day, only to die months later at Old Church, taking a bullet meant for Nathan. Some debts could never be repaid. Alexander, sensing Nathan's discomfort, smoothly changed the subject. "Secretary Hayes has been instrumental in negotiating the new trade agreements between our nations," he said. "Agreements that should benefit both our peoples immensely." "Assuming they're ratified," Count Lukov interjected from across the table. "There are some in Avonia who question the wisdom of such close ties with America." A tense silence fell over the table. Alexander's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Those voices are in the minority, Count," he replied evenly, "and will remain so after my father's address to Parliament next month." Lukov inclined his head in acknowledgement, but his eyes held a calculating gleam. "Of course, Your Highness." The remainder of the meal passed in a blur of rich food and complex conversation. Nathan spoke little, preferring to observe. By the time dessert was served, some elaborate concoction of pastry and fruit, he had developed distinct impressions of most people at the table. Secretary Hayes seemed genuinely committed to the negotiations, though visibly tired. Ambassador Wilson was more concerned with appearances than substance. Elizabeth Thornton was sharper than her sociable demeanor suggested, and Count Lukov was watching Alexander like a hawk, missing no gesture or word. When dinner finally concluded, Alexander rose, signaling the end of the formal gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your company. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some matters to discuss with Mr. Miller before retiring." As the guests dispersed to various sitting rooms for brandy and cigars, Alexander guided Nathan toward a small study off the main hall. Captain Harrington appeared as if from nowhere, taking up position outside the door as they entered. Once alone, Alexander's formal demeanor dropped away. He moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Bourbon," he explained, offering one to Nathan. "I've developed a taste for it during my stay in your country." Nathan accepted the glass, taking a cautious sip. It was far finer than any liquor he'd tasted, smooth and rich, with notes of caramel and oak. "That man, Lukov," he said after a moment. "He's working with Volkov, isn't he?" Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Arrived yesterday, after your disappearance. Watches you too closely, and his accent slips sometimes. Sounds like the men who came to my cabin." Alexander smiled faintly. "You notice much for a hermit, Mr. Miller." He sank into a leather armchair, gesturing for Nathan to take the one opposite. "But yes, your instincts are correct. Count Lukov is almost certainly Volkov's man inside our delegation. Unfortunately, I cannot prove it, not without compromising our negotiations." "Why tell me this?" Nathan asked, remaining standing. "Because I need your help," Alexander replied simply. "The documents I mentioned, they arrive tomorrow under diplomatic seal. Once they're secured, I can return home and you can go back to your mountain. But until then—" He trailed off, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "Until then, Volkov will try to get the key," Nathan finished for him. "The one in this case." He patted his pocket where the silver case rested. Alexander nodded gravely. "Precisely. And he will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in his way." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I know I have no right to ask more of you, but would you keep the case with you tonight? My quarters will certainly be searched, and they would not expect me to entrust something so valuable to an American woodsman." Nathan considered this. He was already involved, already a target. The case would be no safer with anyone else. He nodded once. Relief washed over Alexander's features. "Thank you. Tomorrow afternoon, once the diplomatic pouch arrives, this will all be over." A knock at the door interrupted them. Harrington entered, his expression tense. "Your Highness, Secretary Hayes is asking for you. He says it's urgent." Alexander set down his glass with a sigh. "Duty calls, it seems." He rose, turning to Nathan. "Get some rest, Mr. Miller, and be vigilant." After they departed, Nathan remained in the study, finishing his bourbon slowly. The events of the past 24 hours seemed unreal. From his solitary existence to being thrust into international intrigue. And yet there was something almost familiar about it. The heightened awareness, the calculating of odds and angles, the watchfulness, all reminiscent of his days in the cavalry. He set down the empty glass and made his way back to his assigned quarters, alert for any sign of surveillance. The hallways were quiet, most guests either in the smoking room or retired for the evening. Once in his room, he checked it thoroughly, under the bed, behind curtains, inside the wardrobe. Satisfied he was alone, he removed his boots and waistcoat, but remained otherwise dressed. The silver case felt heavy in his pocket. Nathan withdrew it, studying the intricate design in the lamplight. So much trouble for such a small item. He hesitated, then opened it carefully. The portrait was as he remembered, the regal woman, the young boy who must have been Alexander as a child. The royal seal beside it looked ornate but ordinary, a metal disc embossed with the falcon crest. Nathan examined it more closely, looking for any sign of its hidden function. Holding it up to the light, he noticed the edge wasn't perfectly smooth. There was a seam, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. The seal was a container itself. A soft noise in the hallway caught his attention. Nathan snapped the case closed and slipped it back into his pocket. He moved silently to the door, listening. Footsteps approached, hesitated outside his room, then continued past. Ordinary hotel. Noises, perhaps, but Nathan wasn't taking chances. He retrieved his shotgun, loading it despite his promise to Harrington. Better to break a promise than end up dead. Positioning a chair to face the door, Nathan settled in for a long night. The comfortable bed would have to wait. Outside his window, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. The moonlight caught each. Blake, turning the scene into a swirling tapestry of silver and shadow. Nathan watched it, reminded of countless nights alone in his cabin. The same moon, the same mountains, but a world away from international conspiracies and royal intrigue. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it. And then, God willing, he would return to his solitude, to the simple life he had built for himself, far from the machinations of powerful men. But as he sat in vigilant silence, the weight of the silver case in his pocket, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that life would never be quite so simple again. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the silent lodge. Nathan remained vigilant in his chair, the loaded shotgun across his lap. Years of military service had taught him to stay alert even while resting, a skill that had saved his life more than once. A soft scratching at his door brought him fully awake, not knocking, something more furtive. Nathan rose silently, moving to position himself beside the door, shotgun ready. The scratching came again, followed by a whispered voice. "Mr. Miller? It's Elizabeth Thornton." Nathan frowned. What would his dinner companion be doing at his door at midnight? He kept the shotgun ready as he cracked open the door. Elizabeth stood in the darkened hallway, wearing a simple dark dress rather than her dinner finery. Her face was tense, her eyes darting nervously down the corridor. "May I come in?" "Quickly," she whispered. Nathan hesitated, then stepped back, allowing her to slip inside before securing the door again. Elizabeth's eyes widened at the sight of his shotgun. "I see you're prepared," she remarked, some of her earlier poise returning. "Good. You'll need to be." "What's this about, Mrs. Thornton?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice low. She moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the snowy landscape before turning back to him. "I overheard something after dinner. Count Lukov and two men I didn't recognize. They were speaking in what I believe was Vashian." "Vashian," Nathan repeated. "The language of Vashia, a neighboring country to Ivonia. They've been rivals for centuries." Elizabeth's expression was grave. "My husband's business interests extend into Eastern Europe. I've picked up enough to understand certain phrases." She paused. "They mentioned your name, Mr. Miller, and something about retrieving an item tonight." Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his pocket where the silver case rested. "Why are you telling me this?" Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "Because I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Miller. My husband didn't really leave for San Francisco. He was called away suddenly yesterday, the same day Prince Alexander went missing. William is a major investor in the trade agreements being negotiated here." Her voice lowered. "And there are forces who would go to great lengths to see those agreements fail." "Including harming your husband?" Nathan guessed. She nodded grimly. "I believe William was deliberately drawn away. And now, with what I overheard," she straightened her shoulders, "I don't know what role you play in all this, but I know enough to recognize when someone is being made a target." Nathan weighed his options. Elizabeth Thornton seemed sincere, but in this nest of vipers, appearances could be deceiving. Still, the warning aligned with what Alexander had told him. "What exactly did you hear them say?" he asked. "That they would move at 2 o'clock when the guards changed shifts, that you had something that belonged to them." Her gaze fell to his pocket. "And that if you resisted, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate you." Nathan checked his father's pocket watch. "Just past midnight. Less than 2 hours to prepare. You should leave," he told Elizabeth. "It's safer if you're not involved." She shook her head. "If they're planning what I think they are, nowhere in this lodge is safe tonight. I came to offer you another option." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small key. "There's a caretaker's and cottage about half a mile through the woods behind the lodge. It's simple but secure, and no one would think to look for you there." Nathan studied her carefully. "Why help me? You don't know me." "No," she agreed, "but I know men like Lukov. I've seen what happens when they're allowed to operate unchecked. My husband has the scars to prove it." She held out the key. "Take it. Use it or don't. That's your choice. But don't wait too long to decide." After a moment's hesitation, Nathan accepted the key. "Thank you." Elizabeth moved toward the door, then paused. "Whatever you're protecting, Mr. Miller, is it worth your life?" Nathan thought of the documents Alexander had mentioned, of the potential for war if they fell into the wrong hands. He thought of William Hayes, who had given his life in another war. "Some things are," he said quietly. Elizabeth nodded, as if his answer confirmed something for her. "The path to the cottage is marked by white stones. They reflect in moonlight." With that, she slipped out as quietly as she had come. Alone again, Nathan contemplated his next move. He could stay and face whatever came at 2 o'clock, or he could retreat to the caretaker's cottage, possibly buying time until the diplomatic pouch arrived tomorrow. The silver case felt heavy in his pocket. Alexander had trusted him with it, believing it would be safer with a stranger than with his own people. That fact alone spoke volumes about the situation. Nathan made his decision. Moving quickly, he gathered his few possessions, securing the shotgun in its wrapping again. He wrote a brief note. "Found safer location. Will return. At dawn. NM," and left it where Alexander would find it if he came looking. Opening his window, Nathan surveyed the drop to the ground below. About 15 feet, manageable with care. The fresh snow would cushion his landing. He wrapped his bag in his coat to muffle any noise, then lowered it on a makeshift rope of bedsheets. Once it touched the ground, he climbed out onto the windowsill and dropped silently into the snow. The night was clear now, the earlier snowfall having stopped. Moonlight bathed the landscape in silver, making navigation easy despite the late hour. Nathan retrieved his bundle and moved along the edge of the lodge, staying in the shadow of the building until he reached the tree line behind it. There, just as Elizabeth had described, a path of white stones gleamed in the moonlight, leading deeper into the forest. Nathan followed it, moving with the silent efficiency that had once made him an effective scout in wartime. His breath clouded in the cold air, but he kept his pace steady, alert for any sign of pursuit. After about 15 minutes of careful progress, the caretaker's cottage came into view. It was indeed simple, a small, sturdy structure built of the same timber as the main lodge, but without the ostentation. Nathan approached cautiously, circling once to ensure no one was waiting before trying the key. The lock turned smoothly, and he slipped inside. The interior was dark and cold, but dry and well-maintained. A quick exploration by moonlight revealed a single room with basic furnishings, a small bed, a table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a shelf holding supplies. Firewood was stacked neatly beside the stove. Nathan decided against lighting a fire. The smoke would be visible and light would filter through the windows. Instead, he settled on the edge of the bed, removing the silver case from his pocket. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, he examined it once more. The hidden compartment in the seal intrigued him. If it contained a key, as Alexander claimed, how was it accessed? Nathan turned it over in his hands, studying the intricate design. On impulse, he pressed the falcon emblem. Nothing happened. Then he tried rotating the outer edge of the seal. To his surprise, it moved slightly with a barely audible click. Nathan paused, wondering if he should be tampering with something so valuable. But if Lukov's men were coming for him, he needed to understand exactly what he was protecting. He continued, rotating the edge until it stopped with another click. The center of the seal popped up slightly, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay not a conventional key, but a small, intricately cut piece of metal, almost like a watch component. Nathan studied it without removing it from its hiding place. This tiny object, the cause of so much danger and intrigue. It seemed impossible that something so small could threaten peace across nations. A snapping twig outside froze him in place. Nathan carefully closed the seal and returned the case to his pocket, reaching for his shotgun. He moved to the window, peering. Cautiously through a gap in the curtains, a figure stood at the edge of the clearing, looking directly at the cottage. The moonlight illuminated a familiar face, Captain Harrington. He was alone, moving deliberately toward the cottage door. Nathan kept his shotgun ready as a soft knock sounded. "Miller," Harrington's voice came quietly. "I know you're in there. I need to speak with you." "How did you find me?" Nathan called back, remaining beside the window rather than approaching the door. "I saw Mrs. Thornton leaving your room," Harrington replied. "And I know about this cottage. Please, it's urgent." Nathan considered his options. Harrington had proven trustworthy so far, but Alexander's warning to trust no one echoed in his mind. Still, if the captain had meant him harm, he could have brought men with him. "Step back from the door," Nathan instructed. "Hands where I can see them." Harrington complied, moving backward with his hands raised to shoulder height. Nathan opened the door cautiously, shotgun visible, but not aimed directly at the captain. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until morning?" he asked. Harrington's face was grim in the moonlight. The diplomatic pouch was compromised. "Someone intercepted the courier 50 miles from here. The prince doesn't know yet. I've only just received word." Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. "When will it arrive now?" "That's just it. It won't. Not in time." Harrington glanced nervously over his shoulder. "The prince is scheduled to sign the agreements tomorrow afternoon. Without the documents from that pouch, he'll be signing blind. Can't he postpone?" Harrington shook his head. "Not without causing a diplomatic incident. The secretary is departing immediately after the signing." He looked at Nathan intently. "Which makes what you're carrying even more critical. It's no longer just about preventing Volkov from accessing sensitive information. It's about ensuring the prince has what he needs to protect his country's interests." Nathan absorbed this, his mind working through the implications. "What exactly do you need from me?" "The seal, the key inside it, can still access copies of the documents. They're stored in a secure location in San Francisco. If we leave now, we can reach the railroad by dawn, be in the city by afternoon." "We?" Nathan questioned. "I've been assigned to escort you," Harrington explained. "The prince believes, and I agree, that traveling together offers the best protection. My men will create a diversion, making it appear you're still at the lodge." It made sense, but something felt off. Nathan studied Harrington's face, looking for any sign of deception. The captain met his gaze steadily. "Why didn't the prince come himself to tell me this?" "He's being watched too closely. His sudden absence would be noticed immediately." Harrington's expression was earnest. "We don't have much time, Miller. Lukov's men are searching the grounds as we speak." Nathan's instincts warred within him. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Harrington's plan offered a clear course of action. Yet doubt lingered. "Let me get my things," he said finally. Stepping back into the cottage, as he gathered his meager possessions, Nathan made a decision. He would go with Harrington, but not without precautions of his own. The forest had transformed into a maze of silver and shadow as Nathan and Harrington made their way through the dense pines. They moved swiftly but cautiously, following a narrow path that wound down the mountainside toward the valley below. According to Harrington, a carriage was waiting 2 miles away, ready to transport them to the railroad station in Maplewood. Nathan kept the shotgun cradled in his arms, his senses hyper-alert despite his exhaustion. The silver case remained in his inner pocket, but the key itself was elsewhere, a precaution Nathan had taken while gathering his belongings in the cottage. If Harrington was leading him into a trap, he wouldn't get both. "How much further?" Nathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just beyond that ridge," Harrington replied, pointing toward a moonlit outcropping ahead. "The carriage should be waiting in the clearing below." They continued in silence for several minutes. Nathan observed Harrington closely, noting the captain's Frequent glances back toward the lodge, now just a collection of distant lights through the trees. His behavior seemed consistent with a man concerned about pursuit, but there was something in his manner, a tension beyond mere vigilance, that kept Nathan's suspicions alive. As they approached the ridge, Harrington raised a hand, signaling a halt. "Wait here," he whispered. "Let me make sure the way is clear." Nathan nodded, but kept his eyes fixed on the captain as he moved ahead, disappearing over the ridge. Alone in the silent forest, Nathan considered his options. His instincts were screaming that something wasn't right, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Making a swift decision, he moved off the path, circling through the trees to approach the ridge from a different angle. The deep snow made silent movement difficult, but Nathan had years of hunting experience to draw upon. He reached a position that allowed him to observe the clearing below without being seen. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. Harrington stood in the moonlit clearing, conversing with two other men. One was unmistakable even from a distance. County Lukov. The other appeared to be one of Volkov's men from the attack at Nathan's cabin. "Getting suspicious," Harrington was saying, his voice carrying faintly on the still night air. "We need to move quickly." "Does he have it?" Lukov demanded. "Yes, the case is in his pocket, but he's armed and cautious." Lukov made a dismissive gesture. 3 against 1. The odds favor us, Captain." "Don't underestimate him," Harrington warned. "He's a military man and no stranger to violence." Nathan had heard enough. The captain's betrayal stung, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Alexander had warned him to trust no one after all. Silently, he backed away from his vantage point, intending to return to the lodge and warn the prince. He had taken only a few steps when a twig snapped beneath his boot. The sound, small as it was, carried in the quiet night. "What was that?" Lukov's voice rang out. "Check the trees!" Nathan abandoned stealth for speed, plunging through the snow toward the path they had followed. Behind him, he heard shouts and the crashing of men rushing through the underbrush. He had perhaps a minute's head start. Not much, but it would have to be enough. As he ran, Nathan's mind worked furiously. Returning directly to the lodge was now too risky. They would anticipate that move and cut him off. He needed another option, somewhere to regroup and formulate a plan. The caretakers. Cottage. No, that would be the second place they'd look. Nathan veered eastward, away from both the lodge and the clearing. If his memory of the surrounding terrain was correct, there was a steeper, rockier area in that direction, difficult to navigate, especially at night, but offering better defensive positions if it came to a confrontation. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as Nathan picked up speed, using the downhill slope to his advantage. The moonlight provided just enough illumination to avoid major obstacles, though branches still whipped at his face as he pushed through the dense forest. After several minutes of hard running, Nathan paused to catch his breath and listen. The Shivering forest had fallen silent again. No voices, no crashing footsteps. Either he had lost them or they had split up to search more methodically. Neither possibility allowed for complacency. Checking his bearings against the moon's position, Nathan continued eastward at a more measured pace. His destination was taking shape in his mind, a series of rocky outcroppings he had noticed during their ride to the lodge. If he could reach them, he might find a defensible position until daylight. As he moved through a small clearing, a figure suddenly stepped out from behind a large pine. Nathan raised his shotgun instinctively, finger tensing on the trigger. "Don't shoot," a familiar voice said. "It's me." Elizabeth Thornton emerged from the shadows, wrapped in a dark coat, her breath clouding in the cold air. Nathan kept the shotgun raised. "What are you doing out here, Mrs. Thornton?" "Looking for you," she replied calmly. "I saw Harrington follow your trail from the cottage. I know he's working with Lukov." "How did you know where I'd be?" Nathan asked, suspicion edging his voice. "I didn't. I've been searching these woods for nearly an hour. She glanced nervously over her shoulder. They're combing the entire area. It won't be long before they find us. Nathan slowly lowered his weapon, though he remained wary. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, Elizabeth acknowledged. But right now, I may be the only person at that lodge who isn't trying to use you for their own ends. She took a step closer. I have a way out, transportation, waiting on the North Road. We can be in Maplewood before dawn, where you can contact authorities. What's your stake in this? Nathan asked bluntly. Elizabeth's expression hardened. I told you my husband has business interests tied to these negotiations, but it's more than that. She hesitated. William was investigating rumors of corruption within the Avonian delegation when he was called away. I believe he was deliberately removed because he was getting too close to something. It was plausible, but Nathan had already been deceived once tonight. And I'm supposed to just take your word for this? No, she said, reaching into her coat pocket. Nathan tensed, but she withdrew only a folded paper. This arrived by messenger yesterday, a warning from William. She handed it to Nathan. In the moonlight, he could make out enough to see it was genuine, a hastily scribbled note warning Elizabeth to trust no one at the lodge, especially not the newly arrived Count Lukov. The handwriting matched the signature. On the dinner seating arrangement Nathan had noticed earlier. All right, he said finally, returning the note. Lead the way, but I'll be watching every step. Elizabeth nodded grimly. I'd expect nothing less. Follow me, but stay quiet. The North Road is about a mile from here. They set off together, moving more slowly now to minimize noise. Nathan positioned himself slightly behind Elizabeth, keeping her in view while maintaining awareness of their surroundings. The shotgun remained ready in his hands. How did you get involved in all this? Elizabeth asked softly as they navigated through a particularly dense section of forest. Wrong place, right time, Nathan replied. Gave shelter to a man in a storm. Turned out to be more complicated than expected. Elizabeth glanced back at him. That's an understatement. Do you know what's in that case you're carrying? Nathan hesitated, then decided a partial truth was safest. Some kind of key, important enough that people are willing to kill for it. It's more than that, Elizabeth said, her voice dropping even lower. William believes it's evidence, proof of a conspiracy involving officials from both our countries, corruption at the highest levels. This was new information, different from what Alexander had told him. Nathan frowned. What kind of conspiracy? The trade agreements being negotiated here are worth millions, Elizabeth explained, but certain provisions have been secretly altered to benefit specific interests, including arms manufacturers who profit from tensions between Avonia and its neighbors. And your husband discovered this. He began to suspect something when the negotiations suddenly accelerated last month. Deals of this magnitude typically take years, not weeks. She paused to get her bearings, then continued eastward. William believes someone in the Avonian delegation is working with American industrialists to ensure these altered provisions remain hidden until after ratification. The pieces were starting to fit together in Nathan's mind, but not in the way Alexander had described them. If Elizabeth was telling the truth, the prince's story about preventing war might be a fabrication. Perhaps he wasn't a victim, but a participant. The prince, Nathan said. Where does he stand in all this? Elizabeth's pace slowed. That's what William couldn't determine. Either Alexander is part of the conspiracy, or he's being manipulated by those around him. She looked back at Nathan. What did he tell you about the key? Nathan considered his response carefully. That it accesses documents that could prevent a war. A bitter smile crossed Elizabeth's face. A clever half-truth. The documents it accesses would indeed prevent war, by exposing those who seek to profit from conflict, including potentially members of the prince's own family. Before Nathan could respond, a distant shout echoed through the trees. They both froze, listening intently. More voices followed, closer than Nathan had expected. "They're cutting across to intercept us," Elizabeth whispered urgently. "They must have guessed we'd head for the North Road." Nathan made a quick calculation. "How much farther to your transportation?" "Half a mile, maybe less. You go ahead," he decided. "I'll create a diversion, draw them away." Elizabeth shook her head. "They'll kill you." "They'll try," Nathan replied grimly. "I know these mountains better than they do. Go on. I'll find you on the North Road." For a moment Elizabeth looked as though she might argue further. Then she nodded sharply. "Be careful, Mr. Miller." With that, she disappeared into the shadows of the forest, moving north. Nathan waited until she was out of sight, then turned west, making deliberate noise as he moved, breaking branches, disturbing the snow. If Lukov's men were indeed searching for them, they'd follow the more obvious trail. His plan worked almost too well. Within minutes, he heard pursuit closing in, at least 3 men moving quickly through the forest. Nathan increased his pace, leading them further from Elizabeth's escape route. The ground began to slope upward as he headed back toward the rocky terrain he'd identified earlier. His lungs burned with the exertion and the cold air, but years of mountain living had given him endurance that his pursuers likely lacked. As he crested a small rise, Nathan spotted exactly what he needed: a cluster of large boulders creating a natural fortification. He made for it, reaching the rocks just as moonlight glinted off metal in the trees below. Someone had drawn a weapon. Nathan slipped between 2 massive boulders, pressing his back against cold stone as he caught his breath. The silver case felt heavy in his pocket, a reminder of the stakes. Whether Alexander or Elizabeth was telling the truth about its contents, one thing was clear. By morning, the course of several nations might be decided by his actions tonight. Voices drifted up from below as Lukov's men conferred. Nathan checked his shotgun one last time, then prepared to make his stand. Dawn was still hours away, and the longest night of his life was far from over. The eastern sky had begun to lighten when Nathan heard the approach of a single set of footsteps. He had spent the night in a deadly game of cat and mouse, leading Lukov's men on a chase through the rocky terrain, using his knowledge of mountain environments to stay one step ahead. 2 of his pursuers had given up hours ago, but one persistent hunter had remained, more skilled than the others, more determined. Nathan crouched behind a boulder, shotgun ready. He had conserved his ammunition, firing only once during the night, to discourage a flanking maneuver. Now, with dawn approaching, he had to end this chase and find a way back to civilization. The footsteps paused, then deliberately approached his position. "I know you're there, Miller," a voice called softly. "Let's talk." Nathan recognized the voice immediately. "Nothing to talk about, Harrington. You made your position clear." The captain sighed audibly. "You've led us on quite a chase. I'm impressed. But it's time to be sensible. You're outnumbered, exhausted, and far from any help." "Doesn't feel like I'm outnumbered at the moment," Nathan observed, shifting slightly to get a better angle should Harrington try something rash. "The others are regrouping. They'll be here soon enough." Harrington's voice remained calm, reasonable. "Why not make this easy on yourself? Hand over the key and you can walk away." "You have my word." Nathan allowed himself a grim smile. "Your word doesn't carry much weight anymore, Captain." "Fair enough." Harrington took another step closer. "But consider your position. You're caught in something far bigger than one man. This is about nations, Miller. Powers that don't hesitate to crush individuals who stand in their way." "Like you did with Ambassador Wilson?" Nathan asked, testing a theory that had formed during the night. A pause. "You're more perceptive than you appear," Harrington finally replied. "Yes, Wilson became inconvenient, as did Mrs. Thornton's husband." Nathan's jaw tightened. And the prince? Is he part of your conspiracy or just another pawn? Harrington laughed softly. Prince Alexander is an idealist. He believes he's negotiating for peace, while actually furthering his family's more practical interests. Another step closer. Now, about that key. Not another step, Nathan warned, raising his shotgun to his shoulder. Harrington froze, hands slightly raised. Don't be a fool. The odds... He never finished the sentence. A shot rang out from somewhere to the east, not from Nathan's weapon, but a rifle. Harrington staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as he clutched his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, his own pistol falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Get down!" a voice shouted from the trees. Nathan recognized it immediately. Elizabeth. Thornton. He ducked lower behind the boulder as another shot split the dawn stillness. Harrington dragged himself behind a rock, cursing through clenched teeth. Elizabeth appeared at the edge of the clearing, a hunting rifle in her capable hands. "Mr. Miller, this way, quickly!" Nathan didn't hesitate. Keeping low, he dashed from his position toward Elizabeth. Behind him, Harrington shouted for his men, his voice echoing off the rocks. "I thought you'd be halfway to Maplewood by now," Nathan said as he reached Elizabeth's side. "And leave you to face them alone. What kind of hostess would that make me?" Despite her light tone, her expression was grave. "We need to move. Lukov and the others will have heard those shots." They retreated through the forest, moving swiftly as the pale light of dawn filtered through the pine branches. Elizabeth led the way with surprising confidence for a society woman, navigating the difficult terrain without hesitation. "The carriage is just beyond that ridge," she explained, pointing ahead. "My driver's been waiting all night. Loyal man, former cavalry like yourself." Nathan glanced back, alert for pursuit. "How did you find me?" "Followed the sounds of men crashing through the forest like drunken bears," she replied with a thin smile. "Though you were remarkably silent. Military training." "Something like that," Nathan acknowledged. They crested the ridge, and there below them sat a sturdy carriage with 2 horses stamping impatiently in the cold. The driver, a weathered man with a military bearing, nodded respectfully as they approached. "Any trouble, ma'am?" he asked Elizabeth. "Nothing we couldn't handle, Jenkins." She turned to Nathan. "We should reach Maplewood by mid-morning. From there we can telegraph the federal authorities." Nathan hesitated. "And the prince? We're just leaving him there?" Elizabeth's expression softened slightly. "I understand your concern, but Alexander is surrounded by his own guards, those still loyal to him at least. Our evidence is what matters now." Nathan's hand moved to his pocket, feeling the outline of the silver case. "I'm not convinced he's involved. What if Harrington was lying?" "Then the documents will exonerate him," Elizabeth replied simply. "But we can't take that chance. Too many lives depend on the truth coming out." Nathan nodded slowly. She was right. The key needed to reach the proper authorities, regardless of who might be implicated. He climbed into the carriage, settling onto the leather seat opposite Elizabeth as the carriage began to move, rattling down the rough mountain road. Nathan finally allowed himself to acknowledge his exhaustion. The events of the past 2 days seemed unreal. A simple act of kindness, spiraling into international intrigue and violence. "Get some rest," Elizabeth suggested, noticing his fatigue. "We've several hours of travel ahead." Nathan intended to remain vigilant, but the gentle swaying of the carriage and the warmth of the morning sun through the windows proved too powerful a combination. Despite his best efforts, he drifted into an uneasy sleep. He awoke with a start as the carriage jolted to a halt. Sunlight streamed through the windows, indicating he'd been asleep for some time. Outside, he could hear voices, including one that made him sit up straight. "I appreciate your assistance, but I must insist on speaking with him immediately." "Prince Alexander." Nathan exchanged a confused glance with Elizabeth, who looked equally surprised. She peered out the window, then sat back with a frown. "It seems His Highness has found us," she murmured, along with what appears to be half the royal guard. The carriage door opened, revealing Alexander standing in the bright morning light. He was dressed more simply than the previous evening, in riding clothes rather than formal attire, but his bearing remained unmistakably regal. Behind him stood at least a dozen royal guards, their uniforms dusty from hard riding. "Mr. Miller," Alexander said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God. When I discovered you missing, I feared the worst." Nathan stepped down from the carriage. Cautiously. "Your captain tried to kill me last night, along with Count Lukov." Alexander's expression darkened. "I know. Harrington's betrayal was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. There have been signs." He trailed off, noticing Elizabeth. "For the first time. Mrs. Thornton, I should have guessed you'd be involved." "Your Highness," she acknowledged with cool politeness. Alexander turned back to Nathan. "I assume you still have the key?" "I do," Nathan confirmed. "But there seems to be some disagreement about what it unlocks." The prince's gaze flicked briefly, to Elizabeth, then back to Nathan. "I can imagine. Perhaps we could speak privately." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Mrs. Thornton," Nathan replied firmly. "She saved my life last night." Alexander studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. The key you carry does indeed access documents that could prevent war, by exposing a conspiracy between certain elements within my government and American industrialists who profit from conflict." Elizabeth's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Then, you know about the altered trade provisions? I discovered them 3 weeks ago," Alexander confirmed. "Which is why I undertook this diplomatic mission personally, rather than sending a representative. I needed to secure evidence of who was involved." Nathan regarded him skeptically. "And Harrington? Lukov?" "Part of the conspiracy. As is my uncle, Duke Roderick, though proving his involvement has been challenging." Alexander's expression was grim. "The documents the key accesses would provide that proof." "Why should we believe you?" Elizabeth asked bluntly. "For all we know, you could be trying to contain the scandal to protect your family." "A fair question," Alexander acknowledged. "Which is why I'm not asking for the key." He turned to Nathan. "I'm asking you to accompany me to San Francisco, to witness the opening of the vault yourself, to see the evidence with your own eyes, and then help me decide what to do with it." The sincerity in his voice was compelling, but Nathan had been deceived before. "And if I refuse, then you keep the key and make your own way to the authorities." Alexander shrugged. "But I think you're a man who wants to see things through, Mr. Miller, who wants to be certain about what side he's fighting." Nathan considered this. The prince was right. After coming this far, he needed to know the truth. He glanced at Elizabeth, who gave him a slight nod of understanding. "I'll go with you," Nathan decided. "But Mrs. Thornton comes too." Alexander smiled slightly. "I expected nothing less." He gestured to one of his guards, who brought forward 3 fresh horses. "Shall we? The train to San Francisco departs in an hour." As they rode toward Maplewood, flanked by royal guards, Nathan reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought him here. 2 days ago, he had been a solitary man in a mountain cabin. Now he rode alongside a prince, carrying a key that might shape the future of nations. The silver case remained secure in his pocket, its weight a reminder of the responsibility he had unwittingly accepted when he opened his door to a stranger in a storm. Whatever awaited them in San Francisco, Nathan knew his life would never be the same. 3 days later, Nathan stood on the platform of the Maplewood train station, watching. As Prince Alexander's entourage prepared to depart, the events in San Francisco had unfolded rapidly after they accessed the diplomatic vault. The documents had indeed revealed a conspiracy spanning 2 continents, one that implicated Duke Roderick, several American industrialists, and numerous officials in both governments. Alexander had made the difficult but principled decision to expose everything, regardless of the scandal it would create for his family. Telegrams had been sent to the proper authorities, copies of the documents secured with trusted individuals, and statements given under oath. Count Lukov and the captured members of Volkov's group were in federal custody. Captain Harrington, despite his wounds, had been arrested trying to flee the country. The web of conspiracy was unraveling rapidly, with new arrests occurring daily. Through it all, Nathan had remained at Alexander's side, a steady presence as the young prince navigated the most challenging moments of his reign-to-be. "You're certain you won't accompany us back to Evonia?" Alexander asked now, approaching Nathan with genuine regret in his eyes. "You would be welcomed as a hero." Nathan shook his head. "I'm not one for palaces and politics, Your Highness. I prefer my mountains." Alexander smiled, understanding in his gaze. "Of course, though I suspect your solitude may not be quite as complete as before." He glanced meaningfully toward Elizabeth Thornton, who stood conversing with one of the guards a short distance away. Nathan followed his gaze, but made no comment. The days spent working together had created something between them, something neither had put into words yet. "At least accept this," Alexander said, holding out a small wooden box. "A token of gratitude from a grateful prince." Nathan accepted it reluctantly, opening it to reveal a simple silver medal bearing the Evonian crest. "This isn't necessary." "Perhaps not," Alexander agreed, "but it is deserved. You did more than save my life, Mr. Miller. You helped save my country from those who would profit from its suffering." A whistle blew, signaling the train's imminent departure. Alexander extended his hand, and Nathan clasped it firmly. "Should you ever reconsider your solitude," the prince said with a warm smile, "there will always be a place for you in Evonia." "I'll keep that in mind," Nathan replied, though they both knew it was unlikely he would ever leave his mountains. As the prince boarded his private car, Elizabeth approached, her expression thoughtful. "So you're really going back to your cabin?" "It's my home," Nathan said simply. She studied him for a moment. "Even after everything that's happened, after seeing what's out there in the world?" Nathan looked toward the distant mountains, their peaks sharp against the clear blue sky. "Especially after that," Elizabeth smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Well, my husband returns next week. After recent events, I suspect we'll be spending more time at our mountain property." She gave him a meaningful look. "The lodge can be quite overwhelming. I may need to seek simpler surroundings occasionally." Nathan felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "The caretaker's cottage is peaceful this time of year." "So I've heard," she replied, her eyes bright with promise. The train whistle blew again, and Prince Alexander waved from the window of his car. Nathan and Elizabeth raised their hands in farewell as the locomotive pulled away from the station, carrying with it the young royal who had changed both their lives. As the train disappeared around a bend, Nathan turned toward the path that would lead him back to his cabin. There would be repairs to make after Volkov's men had ransacked it, wood to chop before the next snow, a life to rebuild. But for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to that life with something other than resignation. The medal in his pocket and the woman at his side reminded him that even the most isolated existence could be touched by the wider world, sometimes for the worse, but occasionally, just occasionally, for the better. "Ready?" Elizabeth asked. Nathan nodded, feeling the weight of the past few days begin to lift. "Ready." Together, they turned toward the mountains, and whatever future awaited them there, a future neither could have imagined when a stranger had appeared at a cabin door in the midst of a winter storm. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.